listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me once again, Kevin. Kevin, have you had a busy week, or has it been like nice and calm, or what's the deal with you?
Nothing noteworthy happened at all, right? Just another week, there was 4 games on. That was a little bit more than usual.
We do have a lot to get into. The Flyers did play 4 games. They may or may not have done some other stuff as well. As we're diving into that, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts. Okay. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. So let's start off the top. Let's start with basically how the week started, because
the only story that mattered at the beginning of the week. I mean,
right. The game,
truthfully.
The week starts with a game Monday night against Pittsburgh at home in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, that game becomes entirely irrelevant for the evening.
Correct.
Because about 5 or 6 minutes into the first period,
yes,
the Philadelphia Flyers tweeted, and somebody else tweeted simultaneously, but we'll get to that. The Philadelphia Flyers tweeted that Cutter Gauthier has been traded to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Jamie Drysdale and a 2025 second-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first of all, what? The immediate reaction, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show, the immediate reaction kind of across the internet was, wait a minute, is this real? And then the next layer of it is that it came from the official Flyers Twitter account. And then the next layer of it is that we start getting all of these other details immediately about, who may or may not have wanted to be here and who may or may not have done some things. And we'll get into all of that. But it became very quickly apparent that it was real. Danny Briere spoke to the media after the first period.
Mm-hmm.
The largest Flyers trade in a very long time.
Probably the closest thing, I mean, significance-wise, the closest thing that matches it in recent memory is the Claude Giroux trade, because, and significance-wise, not return-wise or magnitude of the trade, but significance-wise, just because it was trading your captain and a franchise player, like a guy who had been a staple. But
the way Owen Tippett's playing, the return's looking not too
bad. Sure. I get it, but you know what I mean. Like, you knew it was going to be an underwhelming return from that sense, because there was there were just fans that were going to sit there and say there was nothing that was worth it. Like,
sure.
That day just kind of, and that was the complete opposite of this too, because that was he played his 1,000th game, he sat out the next night. The writing was so on the wall. We all knew. Yeah. So we all just were waiting for it to drop, right? Like, just tell us when it's finalized. It's not even a matter of if, it's just tell us when.
We knew that trade was happening 3 weeks before it happened.
Sure,
we didn't know who, we didn't know where, but we knew he was gone.
But we also could circle certain things. Like, we could circle that date on the calendar where it's like, they're going to try to get him to 1,000. And then after that, the deadline's 3 days later. This is all going to happen right here.
Well, speaking of dates circled on the calendar, Cutter Gauthier's return to Anaheim will certainly be circled, because this was not your typical hockey trade where one team has assets and another team has assets, and this team calls that team and says, hey, I want that asset. And the other team goes, okay, great, send this asset back. Yes, obviously that is what happened. But the biggest story that kind of emerged out of this was, to kind of put it a little bluntly, to paint with a wide brush here, essentially it came out that Cutter Gauthier did not want to be a Philadelphia Flyer.
Right. So the only way to talk about this, and let me just start by saying, to preface the whole thing here, I'm exhausted.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay.
and I'm exhausted in different ways. Like, in terms of, like, 4 games in a week is already a little bit tiring enough as it is, because there's a lot of, things lead, the preview, watching the game, recapping it, doing all these other things or whatever. What I'm also, like, getting in when I say I'm exhausted is that by this point, the thing happened Monday night.
Yep.
My entire Tuesday became, this is what we're going to talk about. I go on the station. Yep. I was on OMB Puckcast this week. That was pre-scheduled. I was already going on to just talk about the halfway point of the season. And then all of a sudden the Flyers go, nope, no, you're
Never
not.
Mind.
Here's
you're
a trade.
About something else.
This is all you're going to talk about for an hour. I think we did like a little more than an hour on that show, like an hour 20, something like that.
And quite frankly, if we didn't have some time restrictions on the podcast today, we'd probably do another hour on
we're just going to do, and we're just talking about this strictly first. Like, we honestly may not even get to some of the really good stuff from the week after the fact. That also, it obviously, once the day of the trade happens, the rest doesn't become secondary. But this whole week, it's felt a little secondary because there were even elements of this that carried over to the following games to an extent that you're like, that actually became more of a talking point than the game itself for a little bit. Like, or even even just for a little. So I'm tired of talking about this because ultimately, like, there's so many layers to something like this, especially when there's reasons or you're looking for reasons, right? Because this just didn't happen. I mean, for goodness sake, I still know, like, you texted me not long after everything went down or in the midst of everything and even said, we just spent an hour or like not an hour, but like a long time on the previous episode last week pumping this kid's tires.
Yep.
Because World Juniors was great. It was within 24 hours. We recorded the episode within 24 hours of him being traded.
Monday news drop.
The Monday news drop to end all Monday news drops, kind of.
Truly.
But like, that's what we're saying. Like, we just spent all that time on that. So, this is obviously huge. Like,
absolutely.
And you're going to start looking for the reasons. So I'm getting like, by Thursday, I was past the point of, I don't care about looking for reasons anymore. It's over with. Let's just focus because
he's gone.
Right.
That's the most important.
Well, because also by that point, think about from my perspective. Okay, I cover the part of the trade. The trade happens. I got to literally actively write a trade summary during the first period of the game. Danny's going to talk after the first period. There's all sorts of other stuff going on throughout the course of the day. Sound quotable moments everywhere throughout the course of that night.
Oh yeah.
And then the next day you're parsing the whole thing, which means not only the long form article that I wrote, but also the appearances to try to break this whole thing down, what happened, all that stuff. And then the next night there's another game. And oh, by the way, it's not just like, okay, it's not like it was trades like this could have been truthfully Cutter Gauthier for, and you can't even pick, but you can't even pick the guy that they picked first this past year because he's even played in the NHL already. Right. Like, you can't even say it was for Leo Carlsson, and that's, I'm not saying that would have been considered a fair trade. Like,
right. Well,
but you know what I mean.
I do think it does make sense for us to kind of skip the Cutter Gauthier slander at this point because it doesn't really matter. The kid decided he doesn't want to be here. He exercised.
I have stuff in my notes of things I want to say that will kind of touch on it, but I'm not spending a ton of time on it.
Totally.
But you get my point about the other side of this, where it's like, it's not like they just brought back a guy who we're sitting there going, okay, now we're watching his college games. Now we're watching his junior game. No. He played Wednesday.
Well, and that's what I wanted to get into because we talked on last week's show, like we've talked on every show this week, about the fact that this week was a tester week. You had a game against Pittsburgh and then 2 games against kind of teams towards the bottom half of the NHL. And then you finished the week with a big Saturday night game in Winnipeg.
Right.
If the Flyers hadn't done anything off the ice this week, if they were icing the same exact roster they iced last week, if Cutter Gauthier was still a Flyers prospect at college, this would be a great week. They won 3 out of 4. They lost to Pittsburgh Monday night. We sit here almost 10 minutes into the show and we haven't talked about the on ice at all because of how exciting this all is. And a big part of the reason for that is Jamie Drysdale.
Sure. Now we'll get to him in a little while because we have to, before you can get to the part that actually comes back and talk about what's here now, we got to do the layers of whatever. And I literally have like different questions that are like segmented into this because the place to begin is what happened? How did we get here?
Right.
First and foremost. And you already alluded to it. Simply put, Cutter Gauthier made his intentions known that he was not going to sign with the Flyers or ever play for the Flyers. And he made that intention known apparently after World Championships last May.
Right. And we do know that is a reversal from what he had said at the draft, right? We heard born to be a Flyer, built to be a Flyer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So let me go through the timeline kind of from May and World Championships to the present day when the trade happens, because there's a lot of pieces just within that, even without the trade portion, right? So this is pretty fascinating, this part of it, because in the weeks and months that followed that meeting that they had where he tells them, I'm not going to play for you, the Flyers did 2 things. One, they kept it quiet to protect Gauthier in the event that he changed his mind back. And they quietly shopped him to other teams on the condition that nothing gets out.
Right.
Also, in case he changes his mind, and there was no trade to be made eventually.
Right.
So everything was like that. By the way, over the course of all of this time, and by the way, let's start with this also. The weeks and months that followed included the draft.
Yep.
They were quietly shopping him even at the draft. and nobody knew that.
Rumors have come out since then that at some point in time they were talking to the Colorado Avalanche about Bowen Byram.
Okay, so yeah, Friedman had that.
Yeah.
Charlie O'Connor had that they talked to Montreal and were going after the 5th in the past draft.
Yep.
So ironically, literally the same, like almost a lateral move from your 5th overall pick from 22 goes to Montreal, and you get the 5th in 23, and that they were potentially going to take.
Man, you would have had 5 and 7. Wow.
Right, but that they were going to potentially take do the exact same thing Montreal did and take David Reinbacher at 5 and then go for Mishkov at 7 and get both, and then have 22 as well.
Crazy.
Which by the way, at that point, who the hell knows what they decide to do at 22 if they grab a defenseman at 5?
Right.
Like obviously they grabbed a defenseman at 22, but that was only because that was only after the only other thing you're getting in the first round is look at this potentially elite forward.
If you're also getting a top 5, yeah.
But if you're getting a top 5 and you pick a defenseman there, who knows if you go back and look at somebody else who's a forward at that point? Do you completely change course? Like who knows?
Well, yeah.
And we're not going to try to revise this.
And they did still get a top pair defenseman for this, so it doesn't
potentially yes.
It sure looks that way.
Everything is potential at this point.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing. Like you have to go with that. Regardless, over the course of all this time, Cutter Gauthier goes back to Boston College. He's playing in games, and everybody in the fan base naturally is assuming that any success that he's having is great for the Flyers' future because because they have his rights. This is who they drafted. Everything seems fine, right?
Like you said, we spent half hour last show talking about the World Championships and how great he was.
Right,
World Juniors.
Right. So the Flyers on at least 2 notable occasions that have since been reported one wasn't really reported, honestly. Like one of them, Danny Briere just flat out disclosed it or confirmed it, in the presser. So there's no report at that point. The GM told you what happened with the one of them. But apparently in November, they sent John LeClaire and Patrick Sharp to Boston College. This is according to Kevin Kurz, The Athletic had this in his story. And basically after watching him play in a game and trying to meet with him, Gauthier sent his coach back out to inform literally 2 ex-Flyers, 2 former Stanley Cup champions that he's not meeting with them.
2 NHL legends, period.
Right. No, and says, no, I'm not meeting with you. Okay. Interesting. That's certainly an approach. So last week, literally, again, we're having the conversation about how great World Juniors is going.
Yep.
And Danny Briere and Keith Jones, and there's some mentions that I've heard where Patrick Sharp went again as well.
God, they just keep bringing the most handsome man alive. It's a good PR strategy.
And so they said all 3 of these guys apparently go to Sweden now. Now this is not like that. This isn't a trip to Boston College anymore. This is let's get on a flight internationally. Right. By the way, they left the road trip early.
Well, right, and we're talking about
they're in Western Canada,
and we're talking about an asset. A top 5 draft pick is worth tens of millions of dollars to a franchise. Like, of course, they're going to try to rebuild the bridge and
so
get this kid to see the light.
Sure. So they go to Sweden, and again, they watch him play, and they try to have one last attempt at meeting with him because all that, and we'll get into parts of this, but all that they wanted to do at that point was. If things started to sour somewhere between roughly March and May, he finally makes it known that he doesn't want to play after World Championships. And that is definitely May, but obviously things had to sour before then. So if the timeline that kind of keeps coming up is, well, something went south somewhere between March and May because the perceived notion is that when his season ended with Boston College as a freshman, he was like ready to turn pro potentially. Then the Flyers didn't want to do it maybe at that time because then they had 16 games left. The contract rolls over a year. You burn a year on 16 games of a season where you're going to finish with a top 10 draft pick. They probably didn't feel great about doing that. Oh, by the way, 2 days before his season ended, Chuck Fletcher got fired.
Right.
That's another part of it. So your front office is a mess at that given moment.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to piece things together. Everything's a mess. You're not exactly thinking about, what's a great idea right now? Let's sign our top prospect. And legitimately top prospect. Like obviously now after the draft last year, Mishkov became the top prospect. But you don't have Mishkov in the system yet. So you're still trying to sort some stuff out. So obviously somewhere like in the range where things obviously soured or whatever, that was another part of the equation. The entire front office mostly has changed over. Sure, okay, look, we can go back and look, and look, this is no stretch here. There's pictures of it. Danny Briere's on stage when Gauthier is brought up and shakes his hand and all that stuff like that. There's a picture of it. I used it for a story. Or used it for one of the other stories that went on sportstalkphilly.com this week. I should say it wasn't one of mine. But beside the point. So you can see that part, like Danny Briere is part of it. But when they drafted Cutter Gauthier, Keith Jones was still just a broadcaster, and Dan Hilferty wasn't even in the picture yet. And, this, that, the other. There's a lot of other moving parts. But the only thing that you had at that point was Danny Briere as an advisor, like basically an advisor, special assistant, whatever the title was. And
special assistant to
the general manager.
Yeah.
And John Tortorella is the coach. That's all you've got.
Well, it might just be that simple, right? Cutter Gauthier might have talked to Chuck Fletcher and been a Chuck Fletcher guy, and when that changed and certain things changed about, when he was joining the team, or
right. Well, and it's possible
other things behind the scenes that we don't necessarily
Well, and that's the thing too. Like, it's possible that maybe in his head somewhere he had an idea from when Chuck Fletcher was still here that there was a timeline that they were going to follow, and then now you got the whole thing changed. Danny Briere sitting there going like, I'm 2 days on the job here as an interim, no less. We don't have we're not doing this right this minute. Like, just, whatever. And listen, guys just want, like we've said this many times, guys just want to play. So if he wants to play, like he ends up having to wait until World Championship to play another game. And that kind of, by that point, maybe something festers in it or whatever. And there's no sense in going crazy over it. But obviously he didn't take the meeting, which brings us to one of the next questions. Okay. Why trade him now? And the reason is really simple because
Danny told you.
Yeah, well, and the reason
told you.
But the reason is very simple also, because after he was tied for the tournament lead with 12 points at World Juniors, not even playing to his typical goal-scoring self, and after being named one of the top forwards in the tournament, they felt that the value was never going to be higher. This was the opportunity. And for two reasons. One, he just showed on an international stage, look at what I can do. Right? So, that's the first part. And then the second part is the longer it goes, they have at this point, and I don't know where I have this, if I have this put down for later discussion or whatever, but I will mention it now. This is the second time in recent memory that you can go back and look at this group of Flyers front office and find out that they were able to keep something under wraps, heavy under wraps. To do this for 6 months is basically almost unheard of.
Right. To the point where there were allegedly 18 to 20 teams involved at some point.
At least that maybe inquired about it. I don't know how many were really serious about it. But
how many things happen in 18 NHL front offices and nobody hears a word about it?
Sure. Well, and that's why now, because the longer you wait, the more likely it is that it eventually gets out. If it gets out, they have no leverage, and that would really ruin the situation. They would probably come away with close to nothing compared to what the situation was. So that's the whole what happened portion of this.
Oh, and the other timeline thing there, I don't think you mentioned it. He did skip development camp.
Well, I think I'm going to get into that later, because we'll get in. I know he did, but I was just trying to get to the part where things sour.
I just want to get to Jamie Drysdale as quickly as possible.
Oh, I know. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple with this. Unfortunately, we're going to spend way more time than we probably want to on Cutter Gauthier and less on Jamie Drysdale to start with. We'll have plenty of weeks and shows ahead to talk about Jamie Drysdale a lot, I'm sure. Yeah. But right now we have to talk about Cutter Gauthier, because this is the last that we're really going to talk about him, other than when he's an opponent.
Oh, until the first time he comes back.
Sure.
Boy, so we're going to talk about it then.
Okay. So we just did what happened and why make the trade now. Now the next question, and this is the one with the most speculation, the one with all this kind of stuff. Why wouldn't Cutter Gauthier sign? And I will start this right off the bat, and I'll say what I said throughout the course of the week, because this is really where everybody's got to get their headspace, I think, eventually.
That at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
No, that the true reason is ultimately known by Cutter Gauthier and those closest to him, and that is the way it's probably going to be. Yeah. That said, the lack of an answer is going to lead towards all sorts of conspiracy theories. So I'm hashing out a few of these, and just bear with me as I read some of these off. All this is relevant information to the course, especially
be
to the
careful
course.
with what you say. John Tortorella might come after you in a press.
No.
Just be careful. Be careful.
No. Why do you think this is as buttoned up as it is for this show?
I know.
All right.
I know.
So let's start with this. There was the possibility. We already discussed this part. There was the possibility that the timelines didn't match up from what Gauthier had in mind. Like, it seems now that maybe the Flyers weren't necessarily pushing for Gauthier to go back to college as much. Like, maybe they were literally trying to buy time for, can we get the regular season over with, and then we'll talk. And even then, that might be out of what he had in mind. You know, apparently the decision to go back to school was much more made by the, you know, everybody, his team of advisors, college coaches, the fact that they had a freshman class like they do coming in. I said it last week. I didn't think, like, assuming everything was going the way that we thought it was until Monday, he wasn't going to play for the team anyway unless they made the playoffs this year, because I think Boston College probably wins the whole damn thing. So, okay. And I just mentioned the thing with the 16 games left. Okay, so that meant if he signed, they burn a year, the front office problems, blah, blah, blah. I also kind of have this belief that the Flyers may have looked to delay this a little bit so that you lined, and I brought this up, I think, on a couple different other things, where you line up the ELCs between Gauthier and Mishkov a little bit. It opens the door for, I think it opens the door for, in 3 years, if Mishkov's over here after his 3 years in Russia on the current contract is up, you spend, like, okay, you make it known that he's playing in the NHL the following year, you go big in free agency. Like, you open the door for, and now we start signing people, because that's the way that it is.
That's what we all looked at.
You know,
we all looked at that window, that 3-year summer.
You know, now, and of course, like, as this thing progressed, like, the idea was maybe delay that, because that really delays it. That would give them 1 year with both on ELCs. Maybe you pull back on that even. How, like, because let's put it this way. Briere said this when he went on, I think he said it when he went on the Jeff Marek show, that they watched the way he played at World Championships. They go, look at this, 7 goals. He's playing against, these are NHL veterans he's playing against. And this isn't the juniors. This is World Championships.
Guys with real,
right. Yeah. He looks really good. And you start to think, maybe he is actually ready. Like, instead of thinking, no, he could, maybe the other year of college could be good for him. We'll let him do that, whatever. It's like, nah, maybe we need to talk to him. So
maybe he's too good for college. Right.
So they actually started to prepare themselves when they were going to have it. Because by this point now, when World Championships end, you're past the point of all the mess with the front office to an extent. Like, Danny Briere's the GM officially. Heath Jones is the president of hockey operations. Hilferty's taken over kind of the ownership role a little bit. Things are actually in a really good place. They've had their new era press conference. There's at least a structure in place, and you're waiting to see what they do, obviously, but there's a structure in place. So there's a little less. So Briere said that they were basically under the impression when they got the meeting with Gauthier in May after World Championships that he was going to sit there and say, I don't want to go back to college. I want to turn pro. And they were pretty much ready to go with contract in hand. They were going to sign him if that was the way he wanted to go. And instead, Gauthier dropped a bomb on it and said, I don't want to be a Flyer. And so now we get to the part where everything really gets sketchy, because that was, at least, because again, when Briere's talking about it, Briere is going to tell you we were prepared to sign him after World Championships. That's a lot more information than somebody telling you this is what the report is, and somebody said this or said that. Briere went on a show and told you they were ready to sign the guy. If
that's a lot more than he has to tell you. Yeah.
Briere's been full marks to Danny Briere for being as transparent as he was through the whole process.
Man, the whole organization has been pretty transparent.
Oh, we'll get to that too. Don't you worry. That's literally the next part of this conversation. So let's really quick hash through these so-called conspiracy theories, because there's so many of them that kind of eventually, like, it so doesn't matter at the end of the day anyway. Let's just talk this over really quick, because there was a belief that he didn't want to play for John Tortorella. He denied it. His agent denied it. There was the whole Kevin Hayes angle of this. And listen, this is my comment on the Kevin Hayes angle. Did he have a relationship with Kevin Hayes? Like, did they stay connected? Sure, of course they did. Players talk, and players are observant. It's up to them to make their own impressions of things. But of course, you have a connection in one way or another. You're going to reach out to people, and you're just going to talk. It doesn't mean that you listen to it like gospel or whatever, and things like that. And that's why when you think about that kind of connection, like, is it possible that Hayes has something to do with it? Of course it is, because Gauthier went on a podcast like a year ago and said Hayes took him golfing. They text on occasion. Like, yeah, it's possible that they talked. Right. And the connection exists, but let's not act like an active NHL player in the middle of his career is going out of his way to contact this kid daily to say, don't sign with them.
No, of course. And
that's ridiculous.
And this is also my time to insert this week's version of, hey, don't be weird on the internet. No death threats.
We'll get to that.
Don't death threat Kevin Hayes. Don't death threat.
Cutter I have that part down. Yeah.
It's hockey. Like at the end of the day, I know you love your team. I love them too. It's hockey. Relax.
Exactly. And that's where I was. No, but that's where I was going to go with it, because, like, listen, at the end of the day, too, guys, I said this earlier, guys just want to play. And so sometimes you're going to put up with crap from a coach, or you're going to go through the struggles of a rebuild, or you're going to play the dirty minutes on a third line when you got first line potential, because it's part of the process. And you get to say, for even those years, I'm an NHLer. You know, you deal with it. It didn't end well in Philadelphia for Kevin Hayes.
Right.
We've documented that, and we know the role that John Tortorella had in that to some extent, obviously.
Of course.
And listen, much like what's going on with Gauthier, if you want to view Hayes as a little bit of a villain and boo him when he plays in Philly, every time he touches the puck, be my guest. That's the competitive nature of the game in terms of, you know, hey, there's guys who eventually, like, you sit there and you go, I don't like this person anymore as a player because he didn't want to be on my team, or whatever happened with my team, and that's why I don't like him. Right? Like, for God's sakes, even Crosby dropped that line once. Sidney Crosby dropped that line of, I just don't like him. Well, then we don't have to like you back. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, right? No kidding. But the death threats and that Hayes and Gauthier both said they were receiving, like, give me a break.
Uncalled for. Don't do that.
Just stop. It's hockey. It's a game. And I get that we get caught up in competition and that nature of things, but there's a line that shouldn't be crossed, and that goes so far beyond that line. So, and this is the last I have to say on anything with the reasoning behind it. As hard as it is, the reason is going to stay between Gauthier and his inner circle. It's been kept so close to the vest that by Gauthier and for him, that not even Danny Briere really knows the reason, and has said that multiple times. So,
and I think that's part of the reason that you saw the response in the media that you did from the team is that Danny Briere's feelings are hurt. The organization's feelings are hurt. And that's why immediately, within minutes, Keith Jones is on the broadcast. If you don't want to be a Flyer, you're not going to be a Flyer.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I wanted to go next, because now we need to go to the reactionary side of things.
Within minutes, Danny Briere is at the press conference saying essentially the same thing. Like, that was for a couple of days there.
Right. And look, this is the part that sucks about the situation, because if Gauthier doesn't want to be a Flyer, they trade a top prospect in the middle of a rebuild, and he's not happy with the direction of the team or the recurring issues he claimed he didn't like or whatever, at least have the courtesy to speak to the Flyers on that.
Of course.
It doesn't even have to go public. Like, there's a way to do this where the explanation becomes, you know, Gauthier's explanation is, I just want to keep all this private. And Briere's is, he told us the reasons, but out of respect for his decision,
going to keep it private.
We're not going to disclose this.
Right.
The end. End of story. You're done.
And if that happens, everyone goes, oh man, that's a bummer. Okay, good luck.
Right. No, you can still, at that point in time, it's not like speculation is going to stop. People are still going to try to guess. But I think instead of being like, well, of course you're left guessing now, and in this day and age of social media and the internet and all that, it's not only going to get discussed, but it will get overblown. And maybe it would be less overblown if it was done the previous way, where it's like, okay, both sides say it's going to be kept private, but at least the team knows the reason, and they feel like they can move forward with it a little more.
Instead, it's we sent John LeClaire to Boston, and he didn't talk.
Right, and he didn't talk. We flew to Sweden, and he wouldn't talk
with us.
Right. That and look, it looks bad. It looks bad in a lot of ways too, because it looks bad for Gauthier too. Like. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it does, but
I think the Flyers did a great job of making it look bad for Gauthier.
Well, they did. I'm not going to deny that part of it. I don't see anything.
The second they dumped the asset, they not stopped entirely, but in a majority of ways, they stopped protecting the asset.
Well, and believe me, there's a group of, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, and I'm not saying it about the Flyers version of this, but there's a. If you saw The Athletic this weekend, you know there's a portion of the old boys club out there that didn't love the way that was handled.
Okay. Have they watched the Vegas Golden Knights operate at all over the last 4 or 5 years? Like we
sometimes
just trade everybody. We
well,
sign
no.
trade them.
The part that people didn't seem to like was not the part about somebody getting traded. It was
the media buff?
No, because it was the part. It was basically exactly what you're talking about. To go from, well, we're going to protect him just in case he changes his mind, to never mind, you're traded now. Here, by the way, if you don't want to be a Flyer, you're not gonna be, and like all that stuff. And it's like, what's the problem with that though?
I don't know. Maybe it's just because I work in sales, but I don't know. You made a good sale. You got
Well,
a
and
good
here's the other part of it. Since when? Or like, and you know what I mean when I say that. Since when? It's Philadelphia Flyers you're talking about. If Ed Snyder was alive, he would have been on something.
Oh, and the thing this week that I didn't know if I would ever see a professional athlete climb the list the way Cutter Gauthier climbed the list this week. And this list I'm talking has names like JD Drew on it, and Ben Simmons, and guys who just across this town are just not liked. And I don't know if it will stick with Cutter Gauthier his entire career. If he
got a good shot to.
If he keeps acting the way he does about the Philadelphia situation, it probably will. He's going to get booed every time he touches the puck.
Of course.
The Flyers have a rivalry with the Anaheim Ducks now.
That you never in a million years did you think you were going to say those words, right?
And it's not even really with the Ducks, because
no, it's with one guy.
It's with one dude. Yeah, right. But you know how it works. The first time they play, somebody will hit somebody. There'll be a fight here. It's going to be a nasty game, and then the rivalry will just kind of spiral out from there.
So let's put it this way. And I already talked about there's two things I found, or there's a couple things I found impressive. Like, I already mentioned the one part that I found impressive about what the Flyers did, which is keeping the whole thing quiet. Because obviously the other example that we have of this in recent memory is the whole, hey, Matvei Michkov got a private tour of the facility and nobody knew. And then, a few days later, he's a Flyer and he wants to be a Flyer. And then, by the way, this is opposite ends of the spectrum kind of thing here.
Yeah.
He totally is invested in this idea.
I'm very impressed with how upper management has
because it was one of the biggest criticisms we had for so long was like, listen, what's the deal with this front office? Well, there's so much the miscommunication even within, right? Like they couldn't even get on board with the same messaging to the fans.
That leads me to something here, Kevin.
Sure, and then I want to get to one more thing before we actually turn the page and get to some of the other stuff.
Entirely. So we've been talking all season about this team and how something feels different. And I wonder, maybe this is just how it was supposed to be the whole time. Maybe this is the end result that Ron Hextall was building towards. And when you fire Chuck Fletcher and you essentially reset the corporate structure for everybody above John Tortorella at that point, right? All the way up to Dan Hilferty.
Right.
You put... I think addition by subtraction is the theme for the season. We've talked about it on the roster with Kevin Hayes, with Ivan Provorov, with Tony DeAngelo.
Right.
I don't think we've talked about enough how much we addition by subtraction to the front office.
Sure.
And you remove all of this influence on all of these names, and I'm not going to go through all of that again, but you remove all of that and you install new people. But they're with a fresh way, and I know they're still there and they're still honoring history.
No, but right, but that's the thing. There was a way, and they kind of figured out the way to allow them to be there without allowing, like, full disclosure, by the way, because another key component of this, and I want to make sure that I get this right as we go through, but we haven't heard all year long, right? Pretty much, like, honestly, all year long. It's like, yeah, okay, are they around? Sure, they are. All the same people are still around, right? Like, Bobby Clark is coming to games on occasion. Bill Barber's around on occasion.
They just trotted everybody out for the Snyder anniversary last week.
Well, no, right. Well, they did, but they're there in general. Like if they're around, they're around. There's another advisor, another senior advisor that was I think was pretty recently added.
Okay.
Bob Murray.
Okay.
You know who Bob Murray worked for before?
No.
The Anaheim Ducks. So when the Flyers are trying to figure out what do we do about this situation, they literally went to the general manager of the team that drafted the player they were getting and said, "What do you think?" And obviously he signed off and said, "Absolutely, I like him." So they had an opportunity to get that player. And then, so there's still a level of involvement. But you know what? That's a resource that you do go to when a team is putting a player who was picked in the top 10 also on the table and saying, we will actually do this.
This is available.
We will trade you this player. He's 21 years old. By the way, this never happens. You don't see 19, 20-year-old prospect get traded for 21-year-old NHL-ready defenseman, because something's not working out.
Right-handed defenseman.
Right. And because something's not working out somewhere else, by the way. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You never see this.
This is a very strange change of scenery.
So this is right. So this is actually kind of an interesting scenario where, you know what? This is where you do want some senior advisors around to be like, let's run an idea by you.
Of course.
Because this is different. This is not influencing day to day and how we're going to do things and all that. No, this was I need to consult you because you drafted this kid. What do we think here? I need more info.
But I just mean in general, I think the reset on the front office, I think this is where the team should have been the whole time, right?
Probably.
Like you had the Chuck Fletcher, let's call it experiment. And I think that tanked a lot of your curve, right? You were on the Hextall curve and you were on the way up. And then Chuck Fletcher kind of plateaued it for a while and dropped it. But then it comes back and all of these guys, all of this talent is still there, still floating around, right? Joel Farabee's still there. All these guys.
Is it reasonable to call 4+ seasons an experiment?
When
I know I'm joking with you. I loved your choice of words for Chuck Fletcher.
Of course. But when you deviate from that experiment and immediately go back to success.
Well, they went back to something that they were familiar with too. They went back to look, I know people kind of were rolling their eyes at this a little bit because it kind of, we even said, boy, the commitment to the bid is really strong here. But when you go back to you're part of the family and we trust you to do the right things to help this continue to be successful, maybe that's just the wheelhouse, maybe that's just the right call sometimes is that they get, look, at least you went with, instead of going with and I'm not trying to say they would actually have considered this per se, but for real, they could have turned around and said, you know what? We need a president. We need a GM. Hey, Paul Holmgren, do you want to do this for right now? And revisited something really old. No, they got two younger people who are newer to the whole thing. And I get that Keith Jones never had a front office position and Briere had gone through the ranks, but it's like Keith Jones knows so much about the game in general from broadcasting it that you go, that's a guy who at least I know has his pulse on the league in terms of where it should be, what you should get to be better. And by the way, and we'll get into this part when we start talking about Drysdale more. How did he say all along that we're going to build it? We're going to build from the back end. So they go out and they get a defenseman who's 21 and a right-handed shot. Do you not think that that's having a pulse on where the game, and he's mobile?
Yeah, can we finally talk about Jamie Drysdale?
I will in 1 second because there's one other part of this I want to mention while we're on the front office thing and kind of the restructuring, because that was the one other thing that I found super impressive.
Yeah.
Was everybody having the same message across the board. That if you don't want to be a Flyer, you're not going to be, and we don't want you. Keith Jones, this could have stopped at Danny Briere speaking after the first period. Nobody else has to do anything for the rest of the night. You're sending Briere out to do the press conference for the media. That's exactly the point of it. But to put Keith Jones on the broadcast and say, I'm going to go on and talk about this. And sure, is there a little bit of a nod to Jonesy knows what he's doing when he has a microphone and is on camera?
Right.
Sure.
With Jim Jackson.
Right. Sure. But he went out and made a definitive statement. If you don't want to be a Flyer, you're not going to be. Well, that sure resonated. And
the team went full blown. No one likes us. We don't.
They did, but here's the other part of it. So this was really the biggest one to me. So Jonesy said that on the TV broadcast. Yep. Danny Briere's best jab at Gauthier because he was really buttoned up with it, knew what to say, was transparent about what happened.
Danny Briere.
Right. But his best jab was kind of tongue in cheek, then multiple mentions of, well, we saw him as a winger.
Yeah.
Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You're going to say a
petty little jab.
Right. But you're going to say that because that's the way it was.
They drafted a center/winger and they traded a winger.
So Dan Hilferty goes on Snow the Goalie's press row show. Also, this is at the same time that Jonesy's on TV.
Yep.
I think they sent Danny Briere down to the radio booth too, by the way, during that. So Briere just did the big press conference thing at the first intermission. The second intermission was all three of them went on different things to say the same thing. but Hilferty really
press.
had, but Hilferty to me, because his quote was something about, I'm like, because Hilferty said, like, I'm gonna feel like I feel sorry for him, but I don't feel sorry for him when he comes back, because he made this decision, like, this is what he decided, and if you don't, we want people who want to be here, right?
He made his bed, and when he returns to Philadelphia, he will lie in it.
But what Dan Hilferty did in that moment was basically have an Ed Snyder moment.
He sure did.
He the look on his face as he's saying that, like that, and that's a big moment for the front office, like from an ownership standpoint, because people, like, I understand if you don't like the idea that it's still under the umbrella of Comcast owns the team, but you've got a person here who's going to show up, and he's there all the time.
I've been spouting good news about Dan Hilferty since he signed on.
By the way, the next day he went to practice.
Okay.
Like, so Hilferty does that on camera. They're doing the show on, which is on YouTube, obviously. So like, it's not on television per se, but he has a moment, and naturally that was clipped. It was going to go, like, I put it in a story because it's like, this is a big moment involving Hilferty, because this is the first, like, Dave Scott would never, kind of thing. Right. So you've got somebody who's standing as from an ownership level, who's putting his foot down saying, this is the way you want it to be. This is the way it's going to be. And I feel sorry that it didn't work out, but I don't feel sorry for when you come back, because this is how it's going to be in Philly, and we want people who want to be here, right? And that whole thing, he went to practice the next day and is doing the same thing, going around to fans, shaking hands, saying, thank you for being here, thank you for supporting us, all that kind of stuff. He is turning into a key figure in this thing fast. And, oh, by the way, I'm sure you've seen by now the cover of the Hockey News in the last month.
Yeah.
It's the three of them.
Yep.
Get used to it. This is what you're going to see a lot of right now. These are the three people who are going to be most responsible for where this thing goes. And you better believe that if they come out of this on the other side and win something significant over the course of the next, say, 10 years, it's going to have a lot to do with the three of them.
Oh, yeah. But
that's a big thing. So after Hilferty, by the way,
well, they may be responsible for a lot, but they weren't responsible for the best quote on Monday night.
Well, I'm getting to it.
Okay.
Because after Hilferty, Torts was Torts.
Yeah,
I don't know Cutter from a hole in the wall. I know.
Hey, you met Cutter. Like, what did you say? I don't know Cutter. Nope.
Well, even down to, like, so what's your response to whatever it was? Then we don't want you here.
Yep.
Done.
Yep.
and that's Torts being Torts, obviously. But this one, this was the other one that was most impressive to me. If Hilferty was one of the top ones for me, because like, let's this way, he didn't have to do anything.
Right.
He could have just sat in a box and been like, okay, you guys handle it. This is your job. This is president of hockey ops and GM kind of stuff, not me. I don't need to go out and do this right now. And he still did. But the next most impressive one, even Travis Sanheim brought up how guys in the room heard about him not wanting to come to development camp, and kind of like, he goes, that stayed with them. And if somebody doesn't want to be here, we're happy to move on with somebody who does.
And he said something.
So the players are saying it.
All I know is that, you show up to development camp whether you skate or not.
Right. And so even the players are united on it, which just goes to show you how tight this all is right now. This is like it was, we've gone from so disjointed a year ago, like just absolute shambles, to what this is now. It is beyond encouraging that this is the way that they're able to unite in terms of messaging. They might not be the best team in the league, even though they can beat the best team in the league sometimes, but they've at least done that, for themselves, is that they've buttoned up this message so well that everybody's on the same page, and you've got to love that for them.
And they've done enough that your GM went out there and added to your current roster. We talked recently about, maybe there's an upgrade here or there, and maybe they do a little bit of shuffling to try to, if they're in a playoff spot when it gets close to the deadline. And Danny Briere went, nope, here's a 21-year-old stud, top 6 pick right-handed defense.
Right.
Go.
So before we talk about Drysdale specifically, we do have to talk about, obviously, now, like, the move being what it is. What does it mean for the rebuild process? And because on one hand, you're bringing back a defenseman that could potentially be on your top pair. And he's got that level of potential. Whether it happens or not, obviously, you look, things are unpredictable. You don't know. But like, it's not like you traded Cutter Gauthier and ended up with a couple middle of the pack prospects, or even a first round pick. Like, even if you got a first round pick back as the headlining piece, you still don't know where that goes, and you have to wait to see where it goes.
You got quality for quality here.
Right? Like you could get back a first round pick and it be 2025. Think about that.
Yeah.
and then you're waiting over a year to figure out what you even get for this. They got a player effective immediately. Play 2 nights later.
Right.
I don't like, this is my take on it. I don't think it changes the timeline that drastically one way or another, because on one hand, I think adding a defenseman to the roster right away, first of all, this is as close as you're going to see to buying move this season.
For now.
I don't see them buying like that. Not with, because here's the difference. They didn't have to give up something current or future beyond a guy who didn't want to play here to improve it now. You know what I mean? Like, if your back's against the wall and the prospect is saying, I'm never going to sign with you, never going to play with you, you could just as easily ride the thing out for 4 years of his college career, like most teams do, and then get nothing for it afterwards, except for a compensatory second round pick. Is what you get when the guy doesn't sign, like
something like that.
But you're going to also waste 2 years of a rebuild in the process to let him go through junior and senior year before ultimately it falls apart. No, you just took action. You just did what you had to do. That's why I think it's as close to a buying move as you're going to see, because most buying moves are going to revolve around what picks do you have. And I don't think that now that they've got 4 picks in the first 2 rounds this year, and they've got 3 next year. Why would you trade any of that for maybe 1 round of a playoff appearance right now? Maybe, and I say maybe, and I'm not trying to diminish what they've done on the season. Sure. But that's equally as important. Like you could have immediate success in the rebuild and still build for the future with your offseason.
And I think you can still add and not necessarily trade any of your premium picks. Like, for example, would you trade Nick Seeler and a third to add, a quality third line winger?
I mean, sure,
that sort of thing.
If somebody's willing to go there, sure. I just don't know how many are going to be willing to go there.
Right now, you have 8 defensemen, so you
right. I do want to
have to make a move there.
Sure, and I do want to get to that in 1 second, like because obviously, because on the other hand, basically, like let's not ignore the biggest deficiency now. They basically have no center prospects.
No,
like especially none that are high end talent.
No, but
they just don't have that.
I mentioned on last week's show, though, Noah Cates returning from injury is going to feel a lot like a midseason.
Well, that part, yes, that will feel like an acquisition. Of course, it will.
And at this point in time, that's getting more and more exciting with where the team's at.
But you were forced into trading pretty much the one high end talent center level player that you and what
in
look
North
obviously
America?
no center, because
that's fair.
Mishkov's more of a Mishkov already is a winger.
That is true. Yeah.
So, and look again, it depends on if Gauthier ends up as a center or a winger ultimately. But regardless, you're going back to the drawing board on this, and truthfully, it could be years before you end up with another player of that quality via the draft, because let's face it, they're not picking top 10 this year the way this is going.
Oh, no, absolutely not. They're a top 10 team in the league.
Well, sure, but what does that mean? It means that you're definitely not getting Macklin Celebrani, and you're not getting basically the only other 3 prospects that are remotely close to being like.
And Florida's good too, so your other first this year is not going to be there.
If you go look at draft boards right now, if you want to get another defenseman, you got a great shot at it because it's loaded with defensemen. Centerman, not so much. So I'm starting, I almost wonder if finding a guy to take over the role that Sean Couturier has doesn't just happen through free agency eventually versus the draft. Just because I genuinely think you could be waiting for upwards of 5 years to both draft/develop the player who becomes worthy of that role. Or you could literally just let the timeline play out, keep trying to build everything else, and then go, hey, when the time comes, make sure we have money.
Right.
Quite literally. That's about it. Because otherwise, and this goes back to your point, first of all, they got 8 defensemen on the roster at the moment to start with. But let me play another game with you on this, because let's just go through this list of younger defensive talent that they have and take out certain guys who are actively on the roster for a minute. Because I'm even including Travis Sanheim in the NHL obviously he's NHL ready. He's an NHL veteran, but he's on the younger scale. He's 27. He could very well be especially with the comment that he made. That was very leadership of him. So I just put him up in the leadership group among all these other guys, and then add in now Cam York, Jamie Drysdale, Igor Zamula, Ronnie Adder's in the minors, Adam Jennings in the minors, Emil Andres in the minors. Oh yeah, you drafted one of these, another defenseman in the first round last year, Oliver Bonks in juniors. Yep. That's 8 that could be part of your future.
Yep.
And you only you can only dress 6. So you know what that means? means you're going to have leverage to do something with guys who are expendable down the road too.
Absolutely.
And this doesn't even factor in, what about Rasmus Ristolainen, who's got some time on his contract left? He's been decent.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah,
he
he's
stays.
fine.
Maybe he stays in the picture. Guess what? The one common denominator between most of these guys, maybe Sanheim excluded in this, because Sanheim's certainly not a short guy by any stretch, but York, Drysdale, Zamula's not as tall. Andre's incredibly short. Bonk is not going to be like the most oversized guy. You don't really have a ton of size, so maybe you keep Ristolainen around for a little to say be the guy who bangs people around so that the other 5 can go do their job.
Yeah, you wish he wasn't making more than $5 million for that role.
No, but that's going to age.
The contract signed,
and that's going to age well with the cap going up, so it's not as bad.
No, that's fair.
You do ask yourself what happens to Sean Walker, because Walker now becomes even more expendable than before, because now originally you were like,
it's tough to trade him now because like that's the rest of your top 4
for now. I hear you.
Like as long as you're theoretically a playoff team, it's hard to move Sean Walker.
But think about something. If you go back to eventually, if you go back to 12-6, because they've been playing 11-7 for a while. If you go back to 12-6, Mark Stahl's still your 7 at that point. And you could basically get away with, you could get away with Sanheim, Drysdale, York, and York, Sealer, and Ristolainen and Zamula, and say roll that, and it's probably not half bad.
But okay, so here's the thing: I've seen them rolling 11-7, and I've seen. Okay, so the Oilers were doing it last year, and they were doing it last year because when your 4th line wingers jumped out, Connor McDavid jumped out on the ice one shift, and then Leon Draisaitl jumped out on the ice next shift, and they were just double shifting those guys as the 4th line center.
Pretty much.
Obviously, the Flyers aren't quite as deep or as talented enough to be able to do that, but I don't necessarily mind the 11-7 because you kind of just stick a different center with those wingers, and the rotation with the 7 defensemen hasn't been too bad.
It hasn't been bad, and I agreed with it in the immediate because there was nobody who deserved to come out from the group of 6. It's going to wear quickly if you keep playing like this, because then you're really putting a lot of weight on the minutes of, can Couturier play that long? And like, let's not ignore the fact that Couturier basically didn't play for 2 years. Like, if you've at this point in time, and now they've played what? Because they're past the halfway point. I think it's 43 games in. You're past the halfway point. You continue to do something that nobody had on the radar. If you really want to dive into this thing, then don't run your top line center who hadn't played for 2 years into the ground.
That is true.
Don't do it. So give yourself a chance to balance it, especially when you're running the gauntlet of the January schedule. There's not a lot of time off. And look, you can give Sean Couturier maintenance days every day of the week, and twice on Sunday if you want to.
And on Saturday night against Winnipeg.
Yeah, I hear you. You can do that all you want to. It's still going to add up when you get to March and April if you want to continue to push at that time too.
Especially because at that point you're gutting for
right,
exactly. Yep.
So I think that covers the defensive core and the deficiencies at center or whatever. Do we want to talk about Jamie Drysdale?
Absolutely. Jamie Drysdale, former Erie Otter, drafted 6th overall in 2020 by the Anaheim Ducks. Right-handed defenseman, 5'11", 185 pounds, 21 years old. Kevin, I'm excited, man.
Sure,
I've been excited for some Flyers prospects in the past. If you've been listening to the show long enough, Sam Moran.
Sure.
But Jamie Drysdale is a top 6 pick, and every single scouting report, every single thing you read about this kid talks about how incredibly elite, top level his skating is.
Oh, it is. He's a great skater and incredibly mobile.
Is he everything we wanted Shane Gostisbehere to be?
Possibly. I mean, I kind of want to see him pull off the head fake, move to the right a little bit kind of thing to really drive it home. He got the puck in Minnesota in that situation, and I'm like almost half expecting him to try that.
I know.
Just, all right, I'll just, do the shoulder fake and kind of get get the guy in front of me out of his skates for just a split second, just so I can move around him and then set something up. No, I mean, he didn't go up. No, but did you see the entry he had on the one power play where he just circled the zone? And I'm sitting there going, okay, Peter Forsberg buys all of a sudden, like, man.
I don't
like the way it was.
I never played the game. I don't know skating on that level because skating's crazy. I could tell that skating was ridiculous.
Sure. Well, the one thing this is what I was going to say to you to kind of kickstart this whole thing off is I've done a few different things throughout the course of the week. Obviously, pretty much all of them were Tuesday.
Okay.
So this is without the benefit of most of the fans getting a chance to actually watch him play, other than going off of the Anaheim experience. And you know how much I watch a lot of other stuff. I mean, even watching Anaheim games at 10:30 at night sometimes.
Right.
It's a little bit of a sickness, but that's okay. I do remember two things very, very specifically about him. You know, I know he's a good skater, and that's the one thing I could definitely tell you about him coming in, that you're gonna see this guy skate and you're gonna be really impressed. And believe me, I haven't seen him in person a lot. Obviously I did this week, so I haven't seen him in person a whole lot. Prior to this, it was even more impressive to watch in person. Obviously,
I entirely believe that
it's effortless what he's able to do.
By the way, I did want to mention I will have the chance to see him in person on Monday night. I'll be in St. Louis, section 303.
Hopefully, as long as the illness clears up.
If he plays, yeah.
That was unfortunate. One thing I will tell you for sure in turn, because if you recall, when we talked about this on the show when it happened not last, but like the October before, October of 2022. I happened to go to California right at the start of the season.
Yes, you
and
did.
Happened to take in a Ducks game. Their season opener, no less. And the thing is that as bad as they had been throughout the course of the last several years, they had a lot of young players in there. And sure, Zegras is a highlight, and Troy Terry certainly has a love from the fan base out there and things like that. And there's, all that. There was a lot said about, Drysdale and what people hoped he would be and how people really liked him. And if you want any impression of the difference between playing hockey in Anaheim and hockey in Philadelphia, you'll enjoy this story.
Okay.
So we cover his first game. He plays against Montreal on Wednesday night.
Yep.
And
has an assist.
Well, has an assist. By the way, he hasn't done anything yet. The team is just taking the ice to start the game. They're just announcing starting lineups. They announce his name in the starting lineup, and you would swear it was like they signed Connor McDavid for.
Man, that building was loud. I told you that building would be buzzing, and you said, "Oh, I don't know, maybe we'll see."
It was still a late arriving. It was still a really late arriving crowd. It was just weird. Like it felt. Honestly, I was shocked by how warm-ups looked at first, because I'm just like, wow, it just doesn't seem like it's as big as what I thought it was going to be. It did fill out really well. I will give it, absolutely.
Yeah, that building was that was the loudest I've heard that building during the week in a couple of years.
So they cheer for him like crazy just for mentioning him in the starting lineup. Then they get a power play, and they scored like 20 seconds into the power play, 27 seconds and something like that.
Power plays looked really good since he's been on the team. I'm just saying.
Well, we'll get into that. They've scored in 4 straight games. That's something.
Just saying.
So obviously they announced that he got an assist. The place goes nuts. There was also a chant that kind of broke out in the upper deck that I can't say on the show, but it was
FCG.
Well, no, it was FU and FU Cutter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened. I mean, you saw that. Look, you saw that all week. Okay, people were doing it. Like people were chanting that in the stands. You saw that. I'm sure you saw the story about the fans that tried to go to Boston College and had to wait through security just to and the signs that were being held up and stuff.
It's a little soft out of Boston College security, but I get it.
There's also an element where it's a little and I understand this is the way the fan base is, but there is an element where it's a little much for stuff like that. You want to change your old Ivan Provorov jerseys to Jamie Drysdale jerseys.
I'm doing it for Monday. I absolutely have duct tape ready to go. Absolutely.
That's a beautiful thing. That's funny. So that in and of itself, he said something to the effect of that's like the loudest he's ever heard a place while playing too. That was really cool.
Yep.
But this was before the cameras were on him and before he did his interview, he opens the door to come back into the locker room to do this and sees like 20 some odd me and 20 some odd others.
There's not that much media,
right? With whatever, and just let out a whoa, and we walked out of the room after it was done, and I think I said to somebody who I was walking with as we went to where Torch was to do the Torch portion. I'm like, it's not like Anaheim, is it, kid?
He's never had that much Anaheim media in a post game. Nope.
But he's just from first impressions anyway, extremely likable guy. People are going to embrace this kid like nobody's business. They're going to just the fact that he's here. He's got a relationship already, by the way. Like he's friends with Cam York. Yep. He's trained with Scott Lawton in the off seasons a little bit. So he already knew some guys coming in. And
first impression on my end, he seems like a nice, humble kid, ready to show up, work hard, help the team win.
something. Okay, and this is going to tie a couple things together from what we previously talked about. This was another really key point to the whole 24 hours of like getting yourself ready to play in a new city kind of thing and all that. Danny Briere apparently like talked to Drysdale throughout the course of everything happening or whatever.
Right.
But before he played in the first game, knowing he was going to be able to probably play on Wednesday, goes, "You want your parents to come in?" And boy, did that stick with Drysdale. Like, they would love to come and see me play and whatever, and things like that. And so now his parents are sitting in the building as everybody is giving him this giant love fest.
They gotta appreciate that.
Like, how much better of a first impression can you make on not only the kid but his family for like, we're ready to back this guy for however long he's here.
It would take 4 or 5 Ducks games to get that many fans cheering for him.
And it just seemed like and the thing was like Drysdale talked about how that's gonna stick with him. Yep. That Briere took the initiative to say, "Do you want your parents to come to this game? And we'll get them out here." And they did.
Yep.
Like and that is classic Flyers organizational type stuff. That's how it's done.
I'm so
family oriented.
I'm so stupid excited for this kid.
Sure. Like, well, now here's the other part of it. Like, he's going to need time to adjust to the defensive zone play and stuff like that. And like, look, the first couple of games, was he great there? No.
No.
And that's fine. You like the offensive side of things. Look,
and that is going to be his hallmark.
Well, Tortorella dropped the biggest line that you could possibly want to hear if you're excited about him, because he called him a rover.
Yep. And that's terminology he used for Zach Werenski. Like that,
if they turn him into anything like Zach Werenski, they've won something significant. I mean, I'm not saying they've won the trade in full. Like maybe it just turns out that both sides actually win, but that's a huge success if they are able to turn him into anything close to what Zach Werenski became under pretty much the same coaching staff. And that's really the guy I can't wait to get his hand, like for him to get his hands on this kid. It's not Tortorella. I can't wait to see what Bradshaw does to this.
This team's starting to look a lot like that Columbus team that beat Tampa a couple years ago.
They've got a vibe about them, yeah, of course. And then obviously, I'm talking about what Bradshaw can do to teach from the defensive side of things. Obviously, he's already you've already seen it in small sample, but you've seen it. Put him on a power play, and he's quarterback.
Oh yeah, well, and we saw that it kind of took a lot of this roster a little bit of time to adjust to the Torts defensive system. So
sure.
Even if Drysdale doesn't look great defensively the rest of the season, give him an off season, right? He seems like the kind of kid who's going to go and just absolutely absorb everything he's got.
And obviously the key here, and this is the one thing we haven't talked about, and this is to bring it back to reality a little bit, because the one key to all of this is he's got to stay on the ice.
Absolutely.
You know,
he's missed some injury history.
Well, he played 8 games and then missed the rest of the 22-23 season with a shoulder injury.
Torn labrum.
Yep. And then he missed some time this year already too with a lower body injury. So in order for him to be at his best and be most effective, he's going to have to be available.
Yep.
But the potential is great, especially when like the year before he got hurt for almost the entire year. He was a 19-year-old basically not I want to call prospect, because he played at 18 in the NHL, but he's 19 years old. He plays 81 games. He had 32 points. That's not bad. For a teenager.
For an atrocious Anaheim Ducks team.
Sure.
Embarrassingly bad Anaheim Ducks team.
All right, are we done with done with Drysdale too, and we want to get to some of the games?
Yeah, I know that we're looking at a little bit of a time crunch here, but we do have to talk about the actual on ice product. It's crazy.
Well, we did a little bit already with some of the Drysdale stuff, because obviously he played this week. But
so Monday night was that Pittsburgh game that ended up being pretty irrelevant. You know, the Flyers lost 4-1. The effort wasn't. There was a buzz in the building and people were distracted, and you could kind of tell through most of that game.
Well, it didn't help matters that even when the trade came down, they were already down 1-0.
Right. Pittsburgh jumped out to a little bit of a quick start on that one.
Right. And I mean, look, was it still a game for a chunk of time? Like they went down 2-0. They got one of them back on the power play, no less. Sure. And you're thinking, all right, maybe something turns or whatever. And the third goal that they gave up was kind of killer. And then, like, obviously, as it got through everything, like they gave up a fourth one, it was over. The only disappointing part about that game, in terms of like if the effort wasn't completely there, or if and I know it was a weird night in general at the arena and things like that, but the only disappointing part is that was the last divisional game you were going to play until the Stadium Series, and at least at that given moment, it's like those are the ones you really want to have.
It was a pretty lackluster effort,
right? And you're like, oh, and to be fair, by the way, like they had just kind of gutted out the game against Calgary that they won. and otherwise they had lost, 4 in a row before that, and now they lose another one. You're kind of like the Calgary game could have done one of two things, at least in the immediate, that you felt it was either springboard them to another win and start like a little bit of a streak going, or continue the losing from before. And it was kind of like, so that still felt like a bit of a reality check where you're like, all right, is this thing starting to slip here? Is this where it starts to end? It was the literal halfway point of the season, or it was the 40th game of the season.
Yep.
You're just now you're going to go on a halfway point. So you're still in the playoffs at that point, but you lose 5 out of 6. And it's like, this is what we worried about. And then
the team got a kick in the ass. And you saw for the rest of the week that the game plan was erasing 2-goal leads, apparently, because Wednesday night you play Montreal, you go down in the first 11 and a half minutes of the game, you climb back. Go ahead. Yeah.
Because on the only 2 shots of the period.
Yeah. It was the tough look out of Sam Ersson, right?
Yeah. It was.
It was a tough start to the game for Sam. He recovered fairly well. He
Of
looked
course
good.
he did.
He looked good in the second and third. Obviously, was perfect the rest of the way.
Obviously, he was great in another shootout.
Shootout Sam, baby.
Yeah.
You gave your team a chance to come back. Owen Tippett, Morgan Frost. Man, Owen Tippett had a week, didn't he?
Sure. And okay. So this was something also about like I think it was right at the start of the homestand I had said this, and I'm like, you know what I need to see this week or over the course of the next few games, at least like during the homestand or whatever, somebody not named Travis Konechny and Joel Farabee scoring goals, because it's been like that's been the story. Like no other forwards are scoring, and then Owen Tippett
said bet.
Well, Owen Tippett finally got on one of those rolls where you're like, all right, there we go. Like now there's somebody else who's doing something. Like now it's going to make a difference.
I did also want to mention at the end of this game, Owen Tippett has the puck in overtime and records the single fastest speed burst in the NHL this season.
You know what's interesting about that though? And if you watch the play though, he doesn't get like a real good angle.
Right.
Because like Caden Gooley's the one back on that.
Oh no, he just blows by him.
No, he didn't really blow by him completely. That's what I'm saying. Like he got a bit of a bad angle to go in, so he didn't really get to cut straight in on goal. Gooley stays with him pretty much stride for stride somehow.
Yeah, Gooley's fast.
And took away the pass. So you didn't have to pass to Lawton. You didn't have really an angle to get to the net. So he never really got a great shot off. If he scores, of course, if he gets a better angle and he scores on the thing, then it's one of the best plays we'll have ever seen in the course of the season.
Of course, right. Just funny that I bring up the Flyers setting the record for the fastest single speed burst of the season, and you're like, yeah, and Caden Gooley played it really well defensively.
Well, because if it I'm not trying to deny that that Tippett didn't hit another gear.
Man, he
on
was
that sense, because he realized how much time was left and just put his head down and started going, and it was fast. I'm not trying to say it wasn't.
He looked like Ryan Howard rounded in second. He was
rumbling.
He was hauling.
So that was what, by the way. So Tippett scored in. Like we said, Tippett had scored in that game too, right? So Tippett scored in 3 straight. By the time we get to Friday, anyway.
Yep. So anyway, yeah, and shootout Sam does his thing. The Flyers win in against Montreal in a shootout, take the 2 points.
Okay, which by the way, massive for the end of the homestand, because you were in a position where you were going to get 3 out of 8 points. Okay, you get it to overtime. That's 4 out of 8. You really wanted that other one though, so it comes out as 5 out of 8. And what it did also was that it took the previous 4-game road trip out of the holiday break and evened the points across the board. You got 3 out of 8 on the road trip, 5 out of 8 on the homestand, and you're looking at, all right, it's like going, went 4 and 4.
You went 500 in both,
right? You went 500. All right. Could it have gone better? Sure. Was there a little bit of an expected lull? Sure. It all worked itself out. You balanced it out, and that was fine. And then you get on this particular road trip, which, by the way, is the last one that really crosses time zones.
Right. These are almost your last 3 games in Central Time.
And I kind of want to
game against the Blackhawks.
And I kind of want to. Right. And I kind of want to jump ahead to Saturday, like a little bit. Not like I'm not skipping what happened in Friday's game to talk about this, but I'm jumping ahead to Saturday because you really needed Friday because of how Saturday already looked. Winnipeg was on an 8-game winning streak, 14-game point streak, playing as well as anybody in the league. Hadn't
allowed more than 3 goals in 25, 30 games, whatever it is.
Has taken over the NHL lead in points, all of that, right? Yep. And you needed if you were going to keep this thing going the right way, you needed to win on Friday to at least give yourself the position to have what I said was going to happen last week, which was
on last week's show. I was going to say on last week's show, you called it a scheduled loss. Like you're not expecting a win here.
Right. So if you win against Montreal on Wednesday, like you did, and then you go on the road and beat Minnesota, who's again, but by the way, both teams that are in the same general area in the standings.
Yeah.
Then at least you soften the blow of, well, it's probably not their night in Winnipeg, but that's okay because at least they'll have won a couple of games. And then you play a team like St. Louis that falls into the same category as the others. And you could come away from, saying 3 out of 4 is pretty good right now as they come back home. And there's another 4, I think it's another 4 games in a row at home. And again, try to figure out a way to get home cooking again, because that could be the difference between where you are in the standings from the start of the month to the end of the month.
Oh, yeah.
And this looked incredibly bleak at 3-1 in the third period early.
Oh, it sure did.
And to their credit, you get one player who hasn't scored in a while to finally get one. Tyson Forster gets on the board.
And it was a nice little shot, too.
Sure.
That was a pretty little Tyson Forster goal.
And then here comes Owen Tippett again, and he scores, and now the game's tied.
Drysdale picks up another assist on that one, by the way.
I know. And you're grinding it out from there, right? Like they gave up chances toward the end of regulation. Like you're trying to grind it out. You're just get it to the overtime. At least you get a point out of it. That's a start. And then overtime can be what it'll be. And they get a power play in overtime. And the power play scores. Like the one weakness they've had for all season long comes through at 4-on-3.
A little Joel Farabee net front tip. Absolutely pretty.
Well, after, and this is to go back to Drysdale again, after he turns it over at the offensive blue line to essentially give up a breakaway, back checks like nobody's business, makes a play, and they go the other way and they scored about 10 seconds later. That's exciting right there.
Now, I will say I was questioning the fact that they had 2 defensemen on the ice on the power play in the overtime period.
They really Drysdale obviously makes sense in an overtime, especially with more space.
They like Zamula on the power play.
They like what he's done, because he's got a confidence about him with the puck now. And that's really been the key for him throughout the course of all of this, is like, he's got to be confident. He's got to be able to.
And he has been.
And I'm not trying, like, let's put it this way, okay? Because Zamula's having a year right now, and I'm not trying to make the comparison just based off of a couple of easy, obvious things to say about this, but he's having the kind of year that made people look at Phil Myers a certain way.
Yep.
Except, do you know what I see when I see him right now? And I think other people do too, to an extent.
Okay.
A perfectly good third pairing defenseman.
Absolutely.
Like, I think that with all the younger defensemen they already have in the system too, by the way, like, I think that's why people stretched for Myers, because it was like, okay, Sam Moran's not working out and Robert Haig kind of is what he is and blah, blah. It's like, if Myers could be top pairing along with like Provorov or Sanheim or
the Flyers have been searching for like one more defenseman trademark for like 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
I think with some of the other guys now, like there's people who look at Zamula and it's just like, he doesn't have to be top pairing or anything special. He's amounting to something that's consistent at the back end on the third pairing and can throw in a little bit of special teams time too. It's like, okay, that's huge. Fine. Like,
that's fantastic.
That works, and he's really grown this year. Like, he's the reason why, like, he's one of the main reasons why I can't wait to see what Brad Shaw does with Drysdale, because it's like Zamula looked like he almost wasn't even going to have a future at the NHL. That's how bleak it was starting to look for him.
Right.
And he's turned into a guy that now you can sit there and say he feels like he should be a regular.
Right.
He's earning it as a regular.
And you talk about Rasmus Ristolainen staying in the lineup kind of to provide some size. Zamula,
I love him on the third pairing too, but I love him on the third pairing in that sense, because it makes perfect sense to take a guy like that who may not be the best defensively either and say, just don't get the significant minutes at 5-on-5. It's okay.
I agree. I think it's good that he stays in your lineup. He does provide a little bit of size. 6'3", huge dude.
But he's adjusted his game too to where it's not all about I'm going to go just hit somebody.
No, of course.
He doesn't go out of his way to hit somebody and get out of position. He does it. He's now doing it way more strategically. It's clearly something that they've worked on from a coaching standpoint, and he looks way better for it. And I don't care that, like, for all of the years, like, it's really funny to go back and look when they play a team and see that his career numbers against certain teams are like really good offensive numbers. And he's not really that guy anymore. Like, they've turned him into more of a, like,
He's not a stay-at-home, but it's pretty close.
No. But you know what they've turned him into? Seriously, and this is what everybody said. Like, I can't believe I'm like buying into this, but it's what everybody has said they've waited for. The type of guy you want to have for a playoff run. Because if he doesn't go out of position and if he's going to be physical and it's going to ramp up, he doesn't need to score 5 goals that are not, right. Like in garbage time or something. He doesn't need to score 5 goals over the course of whatever. He can have 1 goal and however few assists he's got if he's doing what he's doing on a third pairing like that. And I know it's, is it rich for a third pairing guy? Yeah, but you know what? You know what though? You've rotated things in and out of place as guys have done things differently. Like Sean Walker's making $2.65 million this year, and he's playing. Look, he's playing in a role that's different. He's playing.
He's outplaying his contract. Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure, but that's the difference. Nick Seeler's probably outplaying his. Nick Seeler's making under $1 million.
Right. Travis Sanheim, even with a raise, is borderline outplaying his.
Well, that's going to age well.
Okay, yeah,
right?
And then
how about the Winnipeg game?
Yep, I was gonna say. So you go into Minnesota, you steal 2 points in Minnesota, then you go to Winnipeg, a game that you call the scheduled loss. It's Saturday night. They're the best team, one of the best teams in hockey. Connor Hellebuck looks completely unstoppable.
It becomes even more of a scheduled loss when they tell you Sean Couturier and Jamie Drysdale are not playing.
Yep. Both due to illness, correct?
No, Couturier was a minor lower body injury.
Okay.
He had, from what I understand, I saw a few people who were on the trip who are covering the team that said he tweaked something a little bit in morning skate, went off the ice, came back to try to test it, still left early after that. And then, almost possibly didn't play on Friday.
Okay.
Gutted it out. They went in overtime, and I guess they just didn't want to push it. So.
And you know what? I'm okay with treating him with a little bit of kid gloves.
We'll see about St. Louis. I would imagine that maybe taking the Saturday off, and then look, they're obviously not doing anything on ice on Sunday, so maybe he's good for Monday. And then they get 2 days off after the fact too, so maybe that allows for a window of sorts where they feel like they can. Couturier is a guy who really wants to play. So if he doesn't have to be out, he won't be, but we'll see how Monday goes.
And then as for Drysdale getting sick, you can't really be surprised.
Drysdale didn't get any sleep on Monday into Tuesday. So I think it was kind of like.
Well, and they talked about it, the fact that, the Anaheim Ducks were heading to Florida on a road trip.
Right.
And then he got traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. And they're like, oh, hey, by the way, Minnesota and Winnipeg.
Right. So, But what a testament to what this team kind of has been all year. First of all, by the way, Cam Atkinson hadn't scored in 26 games, and he
Saturday
scores 2
night
in this one.
Was the Cam Atkinson show.
Sure, and well, it was kind of the Cam Atkinson show, and then it was really the Sam Ersson show because, like, you know what's amazing about that? You were going to basically need that kind of game to even have a shot to win it, and then he shuts him out. Like,
yep. And the fact that you have 2 goalies that can do that,
isn't it a weird feeling that they've got 2 guys that can do this? And look, I don't want to take away from the fact that Carter Hart let in a really bad one against Minnesota. I get it, but like,
what did I say all last year about Carter Hart?
Well, refresh my memory then, because I'm trying to.
That you have to trade him because he's winning you too many games. He's too good. He's stealing you too many points. He's tanking your draft position. Oh, right, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it possible is it possible it wouldn't have mattered?
Well, sure. But as we sit here now, A, I'm glad you didn't trade Carter Hart. B, you now have 2 goalies that can go out there, and even if your team's effort is a little bit lackluster, can steal you 2 points.
I do just want to remind you before we get too deep into the Carter Hart thing for a second, because Carter Hart needs a contract after this year, and obviously there's a lot of circumstances that still surround some stuff and things like that. But he's also going to be due for a raise.
Oh yeah,
he's making near $4 million. You realize that Sam Ersson's got a contract that hasn't even kicked in yet?
Yeah, but it's only 1.5, right?
Oh no! I know, but I'm saying they've already got him locked up for 2 more years, and it hasn't even kicked in yet.
That one's huge. Like, Carter Hart's going to get his raise. If you
really so if you really like what Ersson's doing, and you've got other goalies in the pipeline that may work their way along. At what point does Carter Hart become the guy that, whether or not, are you
about to suggest that Carter Hart's expendable?
Not just expendable's tough because, again, teams aren't going to trade with the situation being what it is, and
of course.
And signing him's going to be hard. Like if you think that Carter Hart's getting the contract that Connor Hellebuck signed in the offseason, it's not happening.
If there's not clarity on the Team Canada situation,
right? No, it's not happening. You're getting
longer than a year or 2.
Right, it's a year or 2. Bingo.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's going to be. And then you have to factor in the price and whatever, goes into that. Cause you don't want to be like, you can afford, obviously, can you afford to spend some money on that? Sure. But you don't want to go to the level that's like, I don't know that you're going to the level of where he's a $6-7 million goaltender. I just don't know if you're doing that right now.
I don't think you can. And
Right.
obviously, we're still waiting for clarity on that. We assumed we were going to get it in August. So we'll see if we ever do. But all right. But I think that puts a little cap on the games that they've played already this week. Let's do a little look
But that's the thing. So impressive how they were able to do that. They end the week now with 3 straight wins, which is massive. I mean, by the way, and I'm not trying to I always sit there and say I'm trying to be as even keeled with this type of stuff as possible, but I caught the final maybe 10-ish minutes of the Rangers Capitals game earlier on Saturday, which
I was watching it at work. It was a good.
That was the super. I think it was the 1 o'clock game, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is hours before the Flyers are going to play.
They snuck a game in before the NFL playoffs started.
Sure. And by the way, so I look and I see what's going on, and I realize that if for some strange reason the Flyers were to win the game against the Jets on Saturday night, that suddenly they would be within 2 points of the New York Rangers for the Metropolitan Division lead. And then you're watching the game unfold and you're going, they're going to be within 2 points of the Metropolitan Division lead. What is going on here?
Yep. And
crazy.
It sits right here on Sunday morning, they are 5 points clear of a playoff spot. What? They're 5 points clear of a playoff spot in mid-January. We're 6 weeks from the trade deadline. Kevin, I don't think them adding is as crazy as you alluded to. And I'm not I'm not saying that they're emptying the chamber. I'm not saying they're trading every first, second, and third they have. But the fact to sit here and say they're not going to add anything,
I don't know though. I just don't know. I mean, part of the problem is that you still have to see, but part of the problem is you still have to see where everything goes with everything else. Like truth be told, here's an example of some of the clarity that you're looking for over the course of these weeks coming up. The Flyers are winning their game against the Jets. They go and they get the 2 points and all that stuff, right? The Islanders were playing in Nashville, and it's a 1-1 game into the final minute of the third period. So it looks like, at the very least, the Islanders are also going to get a point. You were already 2 points ahead of them to begin with coming into the night, but that also has to do with the fact that you played an extra game this weekend. So they have a game in hand too. So you're not getting overly excited if they get 2 points in this one, and they have the ability to basically pass you by tying you in points, right? And the Predators scored with 8 seconds left and then put an empty netter in with 1 second left, and suddenly they get nothing. Now they're 4 points behind all of a sudden. That's where clarity is going to come from. If you don't get that level of clarity, it's not like you're going to keep fighting it, and the deadline's going to be tense because people aren't going to want to be moving stuff that when they think they have a shot.
Right. Well, and looking ahead to this week, obviously we'll see how the trade deadline goes. We'll be following that as we go along because we're way more invested than we might have been otherwise. But as we sit here right now, we're looking ahead. Flyers play in St. Louis this week, and then it's 3 home games: Dallas, Colorado, Ottawa. You're looking at least 2 or 3 winnable games there, and honestly, with the way they've been playing, why not all 4?
Who knows? We'll see. I mean,
realistically, St. Louis is a team that you probably should beat, kind of towards the bottom half of the standing.
And then you get 2 testers. Dallas and Colorado are in the top 10 of the league. I guess it's close to top 5. Dallas is just below it. That could shuffle as the week goes on. I think it's really important that they get 2 days before that Dallas game.
Absolutely.
The Colorado game is going to be interesting because that's the first of a back-to-back on the weekend. So kind of some flexibility there where you're going to be a little bit more rested playing that game than you will Ottawa. But
both day games too. Both 1 o'clock.
Oh, those
weird schedule.
It can be a fun weekend though when you got 2 afternooners like that. It's going to be fun. So
absolutely, especially if there's an Eagles game slotting in, but we don't know about that one yet.
We'll deal with that when we get there.
I don't think you have to worry about it. It's okay. All right. I know we got a little bit of a time thing going on.
We got to get out of here.
Is there anything else that you wanted to get to here?
Nope.
All right. I think we had a really good week. Jamie Drysdale is a Flyer. He will be next week as well. And we'll be back. So in the meantime, follow us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast. Follow the show everywhere you can find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow Kevin everywhere at Kevin_Durso. And boy, we're just along for the ride at this point. We got 10 weeks till the playoffs, something like that. All right.
I guess we'll see.
We'll see you.